Welcome to Politics as Usual, and today we are reacting to a video from Jimmy the Giant. Now, what you've seen recently in society, you know, with the rise of figures like Donald Trump, obviously, with people like Nick Fuentes, to a degree, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, people like that. What you're seeing is the opposite of virtue signaling. Now, virtue signaling has always been a thing that a lot of people have demonized based on it being performative. So an example of virtue signaling would be, you know, when a black man gets shot by the police and the country is in outrage over it, the Democrats will put on kente cloth and dashikis and then kneel in the Capitol, but they won't actually pass any laws that would disincentivize police from doing that. That would be an example of virtue signaling. Companies who sell LGBTQ merch during Gay Pride Month and things of that nature, but as soon as Donald Trump passes a law, you know, that makes it harder for gay people to get jobs, or, you know, hypothetically, they would jump off and stop hiring gay people. Or DEI, which is a more real life example where it basically made it so that companies had to, make jobs available, known, on an equal level amongst all people who qualified. So you couldn't just have, white men applying for certain positions. You had to allow black women, white women, handicapped people, etc. You had to allow those people the same opportunities. Just at the interview, not necessarily at the job, but that gets misconstrued all the time. So basically what virtue signaling is in a nutshell is people who want to look like they're good people in front of other people, but don't actually want to do anything that would solidly, put them in the good person category, for example. So you don't really want to stand on anything. You just want to look good in front of others, and you want to appear as if you're a good person. So that's virtue signaling. Now, what we're going to watch in this video is the rise of the exact opposite of that, which you could say started online with rage baiting culture, people just sort of posting things that they knew would, rile other people up, things that whether they believed it or not, they would post things that they knew would purposely upset people, and that's called rage bait. And you could say that this is the real life version of rage bait, and it's called vice signaling. So rather than virtue signaling, where you try to be the most virtuous person or the most positive person or an ally, all of those things, vice signaling is the exact opposite of that, where you're purposely trying to be the most negative person out there. You're purposely trying to be hurtful. You're purposely trying to be insightful, doing things that are against most people's, at least publicly, morals and ethics and, the way that they would normally behave. They're trying to throw those norms out the window and make it so that basically evil behavior is the cool thing. Edgy behavior is what's cool. Again, Nick Fuentes, the Groypers, they're a prime example of this. How can he be like one of the number one right-wing talking heads out there the way that he speaks about other groups? Well, I think that is the reason why, is because of the way he speaks of those other groups. So this video is going to break all of that down. Shout out to Johnny the Giant, and let's get into it.
I was a young buckaroo and I was watching WWE. The idea was you're meant to cheer on the good guys. Rey Mysterio comes out and I'd get bloody gassed. And then The Undertaker would come out and little Jimmy would boo. He'd go, no, what a poo. That was the...
And by the way, all my left-wing friends out there, if you used to watch professional wrestling and you still want to enjoy it without all of the MAGA-coded stuff, come on over to AEW. Shout out to Sickos Club.
Idea, right? Cheer the good guy, boo the bad guy. But in the year of our Lord 2026, this dynamic has flipped from influencers all the way to politicians.
Do you stand by that claim of calling Tim Walz retarded?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with him. Absolutely, sure.
Celebrities and slowly, even companies. It feels like being cruel is vogue.
Yeah, and the Sydney Sweeney one was also a big example of that, because if you guys remember, right after she got the ad came out and she was interviewed about it and she had a chance to clear things up, she said, "Oh, if there's an issue that I find important, you'll know about it." And she doubled down and chose not to apologize. It was only after all the backlash came where she finally came out and said, "Hey, actually, no, that's not what I believe in. I wasn't trying to do anything racist." And it's like, well, you stood on it a second ago when we told you why it was racist. You couldn't claim ignorance at that point. And you still stood on it. So why is it after that, all of a sudden, now that there's backlash, now it's, oh, I really didn't, mean it like that. So yeah, that was a good example. She was trying to vice signal and it didn't work.
You think Hitler was...
Shout out Clavicular getting arrested in my state, Arizona. You know what I mean? A couple of weeks ago, I believe he got caught with some drugs and a fake ID. Very honorable, and very, very conservative of him, I should say.
Very fucking cool.
Yes. From now on, it's what up, my Nazi?
And it's this right here, which is a fundamental moral shift of the Western world. And so for us to unpack and understand what is going on, we need to dive deep into the rise of vice signaling.
No one can stop what is coming! We executed one of you yesterday!
Yeah, that one was truly disgusting. He said, "We executed one of you yesterday," meaning ICE, talking about killing Renee Good. And he was celebrating that. So this is where that rage bait culture, sliding into vice signaling, this is what it gets you. It gets people openly celebrating the murder of just regular citizens.
All right, so a few years ago, back when I was a spicy centrist, I made a video called How Virtue Signaling is Collapsing Society. And I was pretty guilty of doing the whole, both sides are bad kind of thing. But the core point was that virtue signaling had become this big focal point. And it's important to understand this because it really rose to prominence as a term somewhere in like the mid-2010s. And it itself has roots in two similar terms. Expressions like champagne socialist and an older, kind of forgotten term, radical chic.
Controversial, cynical,
Devastating.
outlandish, masterpiece,
Witty.
powerful, complex, absolutely fascinating.
Right, in the 70s, you have this journalist, and his name is Tom Wolfe, and he publishes an essay called Radical Chic, That Party at Lenny's. And this article is based on a real event, right? So, in this luxury apartment in Manhattan, the famous composer Leonard Bernstein and his wife hosted a fundraising party for the Black Panthers. And Tom Wolfe is invited, he's one of the guests, but instead of getting involved, hitting the Dougie and chirps and gal, instead he quietly sits back and judges everyone.
For example, does that huge Black Panther there in the hallway, the one shaking hands with Felicia Bernstein herself, the one with the black leather coat and the dark glasses and the absolutely unbelievable afro.
Yeah, he described the fundraiser as just wealthy liberal elites sipping cocktails. Meanwhile, there was armed Black Panthers sat around awkwardly, kind of like just the decoration. Or at least that's how he portrayed it. And this is interesting, right? His critique wasn't really about the politics itself, but more so about what he saw as moral posturing from wealthy people.
There you go. So it's basically the sense of you want to appear like you're on the right side of things or like you're a good person. So in order to do that, you do everything that will visually signal to somebody, hey, no, I like black people, or hey, I like gay people, or hey, I'm cool with Muslims, or whatever, the group is that, the conservative majority is against at that time. So what you see is people align themselves up with it, but then they kind of wear it as a badge of honor, and they kind of wear it almost as a costume, and they make it their personality to be on the right side of things rather than just taking the actions and doing the right thing for the sake of it being the right thing. They want to do it because it's a good look. And that's sort of what this is. So that's when you see companies that are having Black History Month stuff and, pro LGBTQ, this and that. But they won't do anything as a company materially to actually help these communities or to lobby on behalf of these communities, you know. And let's not pretend like corporations don't lobby for other things. They lobby the government for things. So if they truly cared about these causes, rather than just selling it to you, they would actually, you know, put their money where their, you know, the board leader's mouth is, I guess, in this case.
The critique he was making was that for the Bernsteins, there was no sacrifice required. And actually, if anything, they gained from it. They gained social status for looking radical.
You cannot say that the Bernsteins or the other people who have given parties of this are insincere.
Exactly. So they may actually feel this way. That's the thing, too. You know, I know plenty of people growing up where I grew up. There were plenty of white people who had money, and they weren't going to get out there and get their hands dirty. They weren't going to interrupt the status quo because that could interrupt their life. But what they would do is talk about it. They'll talk about how it's a tragedy. They'll talk about, oh, how the Muslims are being treated is messed up. You know, all Muslims aren't responsible for 9/11. Like, they would say these things, and that is correct. But then that's where it stops. You see what I'm saying? Like, they're not getting out there protesting. They're not actually, you know, doing anything with any real risk. And that's the point there. You can kind of safely appear radical when real radicals aren't safe most of the time.
They do care about the great work. They do care about the Black Panthers, and they even care about the ocelots and the Somali leopards, although they tend to lump them all together.
Now, this critique can be very legitimate because it kind of captures the image that genuine, real political causes can be turned kind of into like an aesthetic and just performed, particularly by people it doesn't truly affect. But you see, there was an irony to what Tom was saying, because whilst Tom Wolfe is critiquing this, he kind of, you know, de facto positions himself as the truth-telling, bold, brave man exposing liberal hypocrisy. The essay becomes famous. Tom profits massively from it. The term radical chic enters common parlance. Tom Wolfe's brand grows. Meanwhile, the Black Panthers fade into the background. The man that was pointing out the use of radical politics to gain social status, ironically became one of the most successful people to ever do exactly that.
Yep.
Before we go any further with today's video, all
right, we can skip this part because that's not our order. You can watch this full video if you want to get that sponsor, though. All right.
Movement away from the Black Panthers and onto themselves. And this kind of thing happens a lot. Like, this isn't just simply, you know, wealthy people being egotistical. This is a structural thing. You see it with the hippies, right? In the beginning, it was young people creating literal communes, going off-grid, rejecting American consumerism. Jump forward, you know, 10 years, and suddenly it's celebrity musicians with chart-smashing music. It's mainstream clothing lines. It's Coca-Cola saying that they're gonna heal the world if everyone just fucking drinks some Coke. Radical politics very often gets pulled very far away from the people who it's meant to serve. Theorists call...
I mean, you can even see that with rap, right? With hip-hop culture, right? It started in basements and on blocks in the ghettos of New York City. You know, specifically the Bronx. You know, it was black people with, you know, some Puerto Ricans and Dominicans who were in the mix as well, but mostly American black people who created this, you know, art form out of nothing, essentially, because they had nothing. The reason why hip-hop was created initially was because the only thing that black people had musically that they could afford was turntables. You could have turntables, you could have records. So what they did was they turned those turntables into an instrument. You know, they started mixing, scratching, etc. So that was the way that they could create their own music, because they could loop a certain segment of a song, maybe that didn't have the words on it. You could loop that, create essentially a new beat out of it, and then make a new song using that part of the song, or that part of the instrumental, rather. So you go from there, you know, school programs not being able to afford instruments for the kids, so they create DJing and turntabling as a result, which turns into hip hop, which is the struggle story of the streets and of the inner city, right? So that's how it starts. That was basically every artist at the beginning, including people like Sugar Hill Gang. You know what I mean? Like, if you listen to their early records, they'll tell you that they were talking about things that they dreamed to have one day. They didn't have a colored TV so they could see the Knicks play basketball. That wasn't true when they said it. That didn't come until later. So they were speaking things into existence, right? So they were still speaking from a poor person's perspective. You have that goes to Public Enemy, who are, you know, sort of speaking to, you know, they're speaking about police brutality in the way that political structures are there to disenfranchise people of color. So then you go from there to NWA, who is sort of doing similar things, but there's a more street edge to it, and there's a more violent edge to it, as far as not just self-defense, but as far as just sort of telling the story of how people who are criminals in the hood act, right? Then you fast forward time where now rappers are getting money, rappers becoming mainstream, and then you have the Bad Boy era. You know, you have I'll call it the second album, Jay-Z Rockefeller era, where, you know, it's the Cash Money era, where all of a sudden it's overindulgence, it's balling, it's I'm rich, I'm in mansions now, we're driving Range Rovers and Ferraris and Lamborghinis and shit like that, right? Well, that's so far removed from the original hip-hop of Melly Mel, you know, talking about, you know what I mean, white lines, you know what I mean, like, or broken glass everywhere, people pissing on the stage and people just don't care, you know what I mean, like, that's so far removed from project life and just everyday struggle living, which was what early hip-hop was all the way throughout the 80s for the most part, until the 90s, where the people that they're talking about in the records are now making the records themselves. That becomes, all of them become rich, and now there's this overindulgence of balling and, you know, of just capitalism, right? So again, that's so far removed from the original hip hop, and that's what he's speaking to here. Every movement eventually, once it goes mainstream, it gets co-opted by the mainstream, and then it loses its roots. The hippie movement's a great example of it. The punk rock movement, great example of it. Let's keep going.
This reification. Real material struggles are turned into objects. They become stories, images,
such a great
aesthetics.
example of that.
They become like a thing. Then over time, right, as more and more people become aware of it, eventually, yeah, the wealthy elite will maybe adopt some of its language and maybe some of its aesthetic. Radical politics turns into a kind of like cultural capital. A person's engagement with it can be a way of signaling to other people your morality or your taste, you know, that you've got your ear to the ground, you're in the know. But these wealthy elites engage with it in a way that never truly challenges their material power. Then as time goes past and it increasingly seems inauthentic, someone will come along to critique it, you know, a kind of truth teller. Usually also someone who might be of a wealthy, privileged background. They come along and they expose the hypocrisy. But structurally, it does the exact same thing. In both situations, attention strips away from the cause itself. First to performance, then to critique, until the original cause fades into the background.
Also, virtue signaling, which is a completely new thing, where you can publicly display your disdain for someone who steps outside the lines, and therefore you supposedly boost your social cred.
And I think it's this situation that is what we saw play out in the late 2010s to early 2020s. Rejecting wokeism and progressivism, that became mainstream.
Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch.
It's really worth being clear.
Yeah, so first of all, the term woke, again, another term that was bastardized by the internet and by people who don't know the original meaning. The original meaning of woke was for black people who had to travel through sundown towns. The warning for people who had either been through said town before or were aware of what was going on in those towns was to stay woke, meaning stay alert of, because there's people out there that will get you. Now, that was the original meaning. It's sort of evolved over time, still for black people who basically were sort of saying stay woke to the things that the government is doing to disenfranchise you, to things that the power structures are doing. Look at Black Wall Street, for example. We create our own thriving, economically sustainable network, and they come and bomb it and blow it up. Central Park in New York, same thing. So it's basically a situation of stay woke. Again, these are the things that you need to watch out for if you want to be successful. So those are the original context of woke. Eventually, it then morphed into what we see today, which is basically anything left of center is woke. So if you are friends with gay people, you're woke. If you stand up for the rights of other groups, even if you're not a part of that group, you're woke now. Anything that critiques the right wing essentially is woke. That's in the modern 2026 context, that's how it's used. So that's another thing that, again, is so far removed from its original meaning, because once it goes mainstream, now you can use it to do what? Virtue signal.
Yeah, up front, right? Movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, trans rights, etc. These are real situations that affected real people who had genuine, real harm coming their way. And at its peak, they managed to generate major public support for these causes. They massively raised awareness and brought these topics into cultural consciousness. The problem wasn't with the causes themselves. The problem is what happened once those causes started to get absorbed into that mainstream, powerful institutional apparatus. God, that sounded smart. They started to use these causes symbolically. It would come out with these, nice sounding statements, selling you products branded in these campaigns, and occasional small symbolic gestures rather than deep, meaningful change. So what started to happen, right, and this is where a disconnect began, was whilst general society was seeing real material challenges in their life, most of the big fucking powerful people in society were not really giving a shit about that, and largely they remained unaddressed. And you can really see like an imbalance in like media attention itself. I did a rather unscientific Google trend search chart here, but it kind of shows you like major cultural flashpoints where you see big spikes on these topics, and that means that there was massive coverage all around the world. So when you type in terms like BLM, Me Too, racism, transgender, and then a term like inequality, what you kind of see is there were major spikes in a lot of these topics that made them these massive, all-encompassing stories that dominated the media. Meanwhile, inequality, the one that affects everyone, is kind of backseated, right? It never breaks through. And in that moment, it would be very fair to critique the politicians, the media,
I'm glad that picture just popped up, because that's what I was referring to at the very beginning of the episode, was all those Democrats who were kneeling in honor of, I believe that was for George Floyd, if I'm not mistaken. What did they do after that? What bills were introduced? What laws were passed to actually prevent this from happening more as often as it does? You'll never stop it fully. We're dealing with human beings, but how do you disincentivize police from doing that? Was anything done? No. The answer is no. Nothing was done.
Big brands, the celebrities, for symbolically using social justice movements to kind of seem like they're good people. That is a fair critique. However, what if some slippery dude bro comes along and nuzzles up to your ear and whispers, it's the trans, right? It's the chase, this, but the Black Lives Matter, right? They care about the woke vaccines, right? What we saw were reactionary characters who jumped on the opportunity at critiquing the powerful and their empty, hollow gestures, but instead of using that moment to critique critique institutions and the very nature of power itself, and to demand real material change for people. Instead, they started to focus their critiques on a certain type of person.
You know what woke means? It means you're a loser. Everything woke turns to shit, okay? It's true.
Look at those stupid black people in the background laughing. Everything woke turns to shit. Your people created woke, and you don't even know what it means. That's why you're laughing when he says everything woke turns to shit. No. Wokeness is why you're allowed to even sit. Wokeness is why you're allowed to sit in that audience.
We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
Slowly, they started to take the language, the causes, and the morals that these people were talking about and paint all people with concerns on those topics as a kind of like out-group. Once you equate a genuine activist who goes out dedicating their lives, their time to helping people who are marginalized and treated bad as the exact same thing as Pepsi solving police brutality by giving someone a Pepsi, once you equate those two things as the same, as all of it being empty virtue signaling, and that those topics, those things are their things.
And that's why it's dangerous. That's why it's dangerous, because when you have people who virtue signal who aren't actually about that life, what ends up happening is you get disingenuous characters on the right, like your Ben Shapiro's, your Nick Fuentes's, etc. And what they're able to then do is say, see, this is all fake. It's performative. They don't really care about this stuff. So now I'm giving license to people to just be assholes because that's how you really feel. So just go ahead and be authentic. Just go ahead and be real. There's no need to fake it. Nobody's going to shit on you for that anymore. You know what I mean? Woke is dead. That's where that comes from. Look at this guy's shirt. Make America Straight Again. Massa. Why do you think he chose those besides MAGA, obviously? He could have called it MAHA, Make America Hetero Again. He could have did that. No, he chose S for a reason, because it says Massa. But people want to deny this stuff. They want to act like it's not because of racism that Trump won. It's not because they hate other groups. It's because of his economic policies. Okay.
Rejecting that becomes a way of signaling who you are. From the resentment of those things starts to develop its own identity. So a reaction to the woke becomes the anti-woke. And very quickly, you find yourself in an us versus them.
Aimed at critical race theory. Do you guys know what critical race theory is? What the definition of it actually is? We could look it up together, actually. Let's do that. Let's do that. What is the definition of critical race theory? Let's look it up. Critical race theory is an academic framework that examines how race and racism are embedded in laws, institutions, and social systems, not just individual attitudes or prejudices. Okay? So it's not talking about black people not liking being called the N-word. No. It's talking about the fact that if you have two resumes that are identical, one name is Skylar Johnson and the other name is Tariq Green, Tariq Green is going to get way less callbacks on his resume. The last study I saw was 50% less callbacks than Skylar is. Why do you think that is if the resumes are identical? Or the fact that controlling for everything, all factors are controlled for. If you take a white man and a black man who commit the exact same crime, again, all other factors controlled for, meaning criminal history, meaning all that's controlled for. Salaries, areas they live, everything was already considered. When you take all of those factors into consideration, when you have a black man and a white man who commit the same crime, the black man is usually getting double the time for it. Why? Why? Well, it's because when you equate anything associated with being not a WASP, right, which is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, that's what that means. So anything outside of that, you're woke by definition. So, well, I don't like woke stuff, so all of those people are evil now. You see how it works? Like, and then like critical race theory is the practice of making white people feel guilty, making white children at school feel guilty about things that they had nothing to do with, that their ancestors did. Well, I just read you the definition. That's not what it means. It's not saying it's your fault that slavery happened, which is what a lot of these Ron DeSantis types try to push out there as the agenda for critical race theory. But I just read you the definition of what it actually is, so he's lying to you. That's the problem.
Dynamic.
Today, we're going to talk about the rise and fall of rainbow capitalism, the history of the commodification of queer identity, what it says about our culture, our economy, and why this year everything has gone so beige.
Here's the thing, right? If you asked in that period of time any left-wing person to critique corporate woke washing, they would have been there with you. They would have said, yes, obviously, it's dumb, right? Leftists created the term rainbow capitalism basically to describe exactly that. They've always been against performative virtue. But what you have to bear in mind is that that conversation was rarely had. And it's because the media ecosystem of reactionary creators, they are very powerful and very well funded. There's massive major networks, incredibly large sums of money went into controlling the narrative with the objective of painting the entire left as this amorphous blob who are all on one team, all in complete agreement and alignment. And importantly, it's a team that you are not on. And not only that, they actively hate you.
We're under invasion from within. No different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. At least when they're wearing a uniform, you can take them out. These people don't have uniforms.
And for us,
he's talking about citizens of the United States who he disagrees with politically. By the way, that's who he's talking about when he says they're the enemy within. In a lot of ways, they're worse than the enemy because they don't have uniforms. At least if they had uniforms, you could take them out. That's what he just said. So another thing that I want to bring up, actually, here, we're going to run that back a little bit just because he was bringing up an interesting point that I want to address.
Large sums of money went into controlling the narrative with the objective of painting the entire left as this amorphous blob who are all on one team, all in complete agreement and alignment. And importantly, it's a team that you are not on. And not only that, they actively hate you.
We're under invasion.
Right there. They actively hate you. This is a message to a lot of conservatives out there because I've seen this rhetoric. They'll say, I hate everything Trump's doing. I can't stand Trump. I voted for him, but I regret it now. But I can't vote for the Democrats because they hate me. And my question is, why do you think that they hate you? And I'm not saying that in a sense of, well, yeah, you deserve it, so that's why you're hated. That's not what I mean. When I say that, I mean, literally, why do you think they hate you? I don't think they hate you. I, as a lefty, can say, I don't hate you. What I hate is white supremacy. What I hate is overt bigotry. What I hate is, sexism. Again, overt bigotry. So that covers, LGBTQ bigotry, anti-Islam bigotry, anti-Jewish bigotry. I'm not really cool with none of it, right? So since I'm not cool with none of that, I'm not cool with people who are cool with that. So if you choose to support somebody who is openly anti all of these groups, anti everything that's not a WASP, essentially, right? In Trump's case, it's not necessarily that ideological. He's just anti everybody who's not a billionaire, pretty much. But there's not really too much ideology to it. Like, he doesn't give a fuck about what Elon Musk's ideology is, as long as they can make money together. He doesn't care, you know. Same thing with, you know, the Adelsons who gave him all that money. Like, do you really think Trump is that dedicated to Israel on ideological grounds? Like, he wants all the Jewish people to reclaim the land so Jesus can come back? You think that's what Trump wants? No. That's not why Donald Trump is doing that. It's because he's paid a lot of money to feel that way, and he's going to take the money. That's why. The Adelsons gave him hundreds of millions of dollars, I want to say, to run. So that's what it is. So what you see then is, again, there's certain behaviors that we don't tolerate. If you don't display those behaviors, we don't have a problem with you. Whereas I would argue on the right, it has nothing to do with behavior. It's all based on stereotype and fear why they don't like other groups. They don't like gay people because religion taught them not to like gay people, and they think it's weird. That's it. It's just those two things. Religion taught them that gay people are weird and that trans people are weird, so they don't accept it. And it's like anti-family somehow. You know, so these are their arguments, right? But it's not rational, right? Same thing with, you know, anti-race bigotry, you know what I mean? Whether it's black people, whether it's, you know, Arabic people, whether it's Hispanic people, like, even that, religion has a lot to do with that because it's tribal, and there are passages in the Bible that flat out tell you that intertribe mingling is a sin. So you could look at that as interracial mingling being a sin. You know what I mean? So a lot of my cousins that are wonderful people are babies of sin by this logic. You know what I mean? That's what it says in the Bible, though. So if that's your religion, you can't really go against it. You just have to make excuses why it's okay. But it says what it says, right? So that's the thing. The reasons that they provide that are their reasons for disliking the left typically are not behavior related. You know, like, you can say crime statistics, you know what I mean, and say that's why you don't like black people, but guess what? Those black people are committing crimes against other black people. They're not really committing crimes against white people. All crimes are basically crimes of proximity, and most people live amongst their own groups. So by that logic, black people's crimes shouldn't bother you at all because it has nothing to do with you. You're not affected by these crimes. Unless you live in a black neighborhood, which, how'd you end up there? You know what I mean? There's trailer parks. It's low-income white people that live there. You could still live amongst your own, and you see how that is. You know, you tell me if the crime isn't just as bad in the trailer parks and in the low-income white areas as it is in the hood. What do you think Breaking Bad was about? You think that's fake? It's not fake. It's based on shit that happens all the time. And so since that's the case, what's your explanation for it? You know? Again, so when the right says they don't like the left, it's not behavior based. It's not because the left does anything that actually bothers the lives of right wingers. The only way it could bother you is if you're nosy and if you're purposely interjecting yourself into other people's business. You don't like gay marriage. Okay, don't get gay married. That's how you solve that problem for yourself. Because if other people are getting gay married, that doesn't affect you at all. You know, affirmative action. It's like, okay, if your kid has a 4.0 or a 3.5 or whatever, if they have the grades to get into school, a black kid with a 2.8 isn't going to prevent them from getting into school. They're just going to be able to maybe get more of, they're going to look more into the black kid's background to see why he deserves a shot at school. But it's not going to be like, okay, well, let's kick out the white kid with the 3.5. That's never been how it worked. And people were lying about that. So let's keep going with the video.
From within, no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. At least when they're wearing a uniform, you can take them out.
Yeah, so just to conclude that point, actually, right-wingers, we have issues with the way you treat people, and that's why it may come off as we don't like you. If you were nicer people, we wouldn't have a problem with you. Right-wingers tend to have a problem with lefties based on their identity, and sometimes that's enough. I don't like gay people because of religion. I don't like black people because of crime, even though I just told you that that doesn't even affect you. I don't like Muslims because they're terrorists, even though you don't know anybody that's been blown up by a Muslim unless they were overseas. Or if you're one of the tiny percentage of population that knew somebody that was in 9/11. Outside of that, not too many people know anybody directly who were impacted by Muslim terrorism, but yet you hate Muslims. It's weird. That's all I'm saying. Like, so just evaluate why you think we hate you and revisit whether or not you would vote for a Democrat in the future.
People don't have uniforms.
And for us to understand this sort of us versus them dynamic, there's some really important psychology that is at play. And it explains why this sort of thing happens continuously throughout history. So as you're probably aware, humans, we're sociable creatures. Despite what the Sigma males will tell you, we love squadding up. For most of our evolutionary history, if you were part of a gang, you ate. If you weren't, you died. And that's because, for most of history, resources were scarce. So our brains developed the function of protecting our tribe. Tribalism. And there's a really important hormone, right, that's involved in this, and that is oxytocin. You might know it as that love hormone, that love juice. Basically, it's a bonding chemical. It's released when parents bond with children and people fall in love when you hit 99 woodcutting on RuneScape. But the thing about oxytocin, right, it doesn't just give you warmth and trust. In a series of experiments done by Dutch researchers, participants were given oxytocin and then asked to make moral decisions. One of the decisions was the classic moral dilemma. It's sometimes known as like the train track problem. You're presented with a choice. You have a train, it's traveling, it's going to hit some people. If you do nothing, multiple people will die, or you could choose to do something, killing one person and saving more people. But what these researchers did was give it a twist, right? They varied who was on the track. Sometimes it was someone from the participants' in-group. In this case, that was Dutch people. Sometimes it was from someone who was clearly marked as an out-group. Sometimes it was Germans, and other times it was Arabs. And the result showed something kind of disturbing. People were more willing to sacrifice the person who appeared as an outsider.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
no,
that
doesn't
is
surprise
scary,
me at all.
right? Because if you were just to stop thinking and just stop your analysis right there, a person could claim, look, we're biologically racist. Maybe if it's just nature, why should we fight it? And that is exactly where far-right and fascist ideology comes from. This is what can be called biological determinism. Your biology, your natural instincts determine outcomes. So they...
Yeah, and see, the problem with that logic is that basically removes all human agency and all decision making, because then if you just reduce us to, and I'm not talking biologically, but if you just reduce us to, well, we're just animals, so it just is what it is, this is how humans are, then you take away all responsibility and all agency from humans to make decisions to be a better human being. You're taking away that agency by basically just saying, well, we're all just animals, and, the way our biology's wired, this is how we are, so it is. It's like, no, we have the mental capacity to understand why we may have certain tendencies. Yes, that's very true. but we also have self-control. We're also self-aware. These are things that most other animals are not, you know, at least not to the degree that human beings are. So that excuse doesn't pan out actually at all, really. That could be a justification for any behavior, because you could just say, well, that's just the animalistic nature of human beings. No, that's not acceptable. There's certain things that we have deemed as not acceptable. We have checks and balances in place in society for a reason, to make sure that these things that we have deemed socially unacceptable don't continue to happen. So that's a bullshit excuse.
Claim it's logical to follow it. But the important question you have to ask is, how are in-groups defined?
Right.
And who defines them?
It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Since I'm the teacher and I have blue eyes, I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day. I don't see the yardstick, do you?
Mr. Cummings over there. Hey, mister, you better keep that on your desk. Look, the brown-eyed people get out of hand.
So yeah, in some versions of the experiment, in-group membership lined up with things like nationality, ethnicity. But in many other instances of this kind of experiment study, instead of ethnicity and nationality, they gave people arbitrary group markers. If there is someone on that train track with a different skin color to you, however, they're wearing your favorite football team's hat, or maybe even they just have the same t-shirt color as you, suddenly and measurably, your brain responds differently. They are no longer processed as being a them. They are treated as one of us. And this really is where I find it interesting.
That is super interesting to know that if they're wearing your favorite sports team or your favorite, you know, color t-shirt or something like that, that it would actually result in them, you know, psychologically changing whether or not they would save your life or not. That's very interesting.
In analyzing the confusing contradiction of the modern far right. People like Tommy Robinson, right? Often one of the biggest defenses Tommy Robinson will make as to why he's not racist is because he always bangs on about his Jamaican and Sikh friends, right? He has multicultural groups of friends.
I've spent the last 6-7 years forming relationships with Sikhs across the country, and we couldn't ask, and no one could ask for a better minority group. A more loyal, a more patriotic, a more hard-working group of people.
But what's happened here is just the in-group markers have changed. What he considers integrated immigrants are in his in-group. And what has happened is that in-group has selected Muslims and refugees as the out-group.
And you can see the same thing happening here in the United States where, you know, on the right wing especially, you're seeing half of the talking heads and the pundits are anti-Israel, therefore they're by default siding with Palestine, but they're not actually siding with Palestinians. If you really notice, what they're doing is they're only making anti-Israel comments. They're not actually saying anything positive about the Palestinian people, about how they deserve the land, how they deserve to be there, how they will speak about how Israel's committing a genocide, but they're not really empathetic towards the people that are being genocided. So there's another reason for it. It's because they're anti-Jewish, and this is an acceptable way right now to be anti-Jewish because everybody's against what Israel's doing, right? So it's very easy to conflate the two things and say, hey, I'm on your team because I'm also anti-Israel. And it's like, right, but why are you anti-Israel? You're anti-Israel because you don't like Jewish people. I'm anti-Israel because I'm against ethno-states, full stop. That's why. So there is a difference there. Whereas the other side are the people who are super pro-Israel, like your Ben Shapiro's and people like that, and they're just anti-Muslim at that point. You know, they just hate Muslims. Ben Shapiro famously said, Jews build, you know, civilization, Arabs bomb crap and live in sewage. This is the way he thinks. So, okay, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them.
And that's the thing about the ideas of like biological determinism. The people who say that ethnic in-group and out-group is natural and therefore we should follow that, they ignore the fact that the whole point of society is built to overcome our biological instincts.
Exactly.
If we lived by raw biology, we wouldn't look after disabled people. We wouldn't adopt children. Nepotism would just be the norm. Violence for any reason would be legal. Law wouldn't exist. What biology gives us is tendencies. Society decides on which ones to reinforce, which ones to attempt to restrain, and which ones to redirect. That is the key point. These experiments do not show that racism is inevitable. They show us that in-group, out-group tendencies exist and they are socially constructed. And they are incredibly flexible based on very arbitrary reasons such as t-shirt color and football team. However, that is also a problem, right? If the boundaries are very flexible, then whoever is the person with the loudest, the most powerful voice, who has their hands on the biggest microphones with the biggest audience, they get to decide who is the out-group.
But equally importantly, we're cracking down on more than $19 billion in fraud that was stolen by Somalian bandits. Can you believe that Somalia, they turned out to be higher IQ than we thought?
I say tell the nation. You say deportation. Tell the nation. Tell the nation.
You've probably heard the parable, right? With the red ants and the black ants. Put them in the jar, they get along. Shake the jar and they all start killing each other. This phenomena seems to map onto lots of academic research. Realistic group conflict theory, integrated threat theory, uncertainty identity theory. And the findings are pretty consistent. When people feel economically insecure or socially unstable, they cling very hard onto group identity. And they often become more hostile to the other. This really helps us to understand why figures like Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage were considered very fringe in the 2000s. If anything, they were the out-group. Everyone hated them. And that's because in the 2000s, you know, life was good. We were getting regular GTA releases. David Beckham was scoring screamers. Things were pretty good. But then, you know, after the financial crash, years of austerity, stagnation, a global pandemic, global conflicts popping off, things just feel less stable. People start feeling increasingly anxious and they start looking for explanations. So when you have someone who points out and says there are enemy groups and they are the reason why you're struggling, suddenly that story starts to stick. Once the woke and the progressives are framed as the enemy, people don't just reject them, they reject the morality that is associated with them, and they form a counter identity instead. An identity whose values aren't solidarity, dignity, and shared improvement, but instead you get a reactionary inversion, resentment, aggression, exclusion, and isolation. And it's there where we see the beginning of vice signaling.
W. Epstein, look, I'm on my villain arc, okay? Sometimes you gotta be the villain.
This fuck.
Epstein's my boy, dude. Let's just be honest. Epstein was cool as fuck. There, I said it. What are you gonna do? Go ahead, cancel me.
It's basically just doing shitty things to look tough to win other people's approval. It comes along as an adaptive response to a specific political and media environment. When people repeatedly see big moral claims, symbolic gestures, emotional appeals used by powerful institutions, but they don't see these big grand claims translating into like improvements materially in their life. So they start to lose trust in that moral language and they start to become skeptical. And in fact, the use of moral language becomes a cultural signal for an opposing group. Once morality is now culturally coded as being their thing, performatively rejecting it becomes a new form of group loyalty. This is what vice signaling is, right? It's group positioning. It's showing to other people, look, I'm not one of them. I don't speak their language. I don't play their moral games. And they do this by signaling edgy beliefs and using edgy language. Like, one very basic specific example is the use of the word retard. People seem very proud that that one's come back. They sort of say it sometimes and they expect you to go, fucking hell, bro. You don't give a fuck, man.
Do you stand by that claim of calling Tim Walz retarded?
Yeah, I think there's something wrong with him. Absolutely, sure.
And partly the kind of ideas behind vice signaling is to show that you perceive the virtue signaling of other people to be inauthentic and actually you're very authentic.
I mean, do you think you're the best person, Nick Fuentes, to lecture people about performative cruelty?
Why, are you accusing me of being cruel? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
How am I cruel?
You're cruel about black people. You're cruel about women. I mean, you're cruel about a lot of people, and you're very performative.
Okay. I don't think I'm performative. If anything, everyone else is performative. I'm authentic. You know, whatever you want to say about me, it's real. It's from the gut.
This is what we see in the...
There's a lot of theories about this guy where people think, and there's a lot of very credible evidence, I would say. I'll also say allegedly for the sake of YouTube, that Nick Fuentes is gay and that he's potentially actually a secret lefty who was essentially there to just break the Republican Party. And he's essentially doing what Jimmy Dore did on the left, which is, I'm so left-wing, I'm more lefty than anybody out there, so therefore nobody's good enough for me. So it sort of circles back around to where it's like, well, you might as well vote for Trump because the Democrats are so shitty because they're not left enough. Whereas Nick Fuentes is essentially doing the same thing on the right, where he's like, Trump is not right-wing enough. He's so shitty, you might as well vote for Democrats. So it's like he's doing the same thing, but he's being a little bit more overt about it, I would say, because he almost, like, he has, I don't know if it was jokingly, but he has verbally at least endorsed, I want to say Gavin Newsom more than once. So, again, his reasons are cheeky for doing so, but he's doing so. So how much of his audience are going to be tricked into actually voting for a Democrat based on a quote-unquote joke? Because he has this massive following. So, I don't know. These are just interesting theories to ponder. I don't personally believe that. I think he's just a shock value guy. I do think he is a right-winger. I don't think he's on the left at all. But it's an interesting theory if you look at what he's doing.
Origins of the term based. It's kind of used by everyone now, but for a period of time, it was really meant to signal, I'm like real as they come, bruh. I'm based in truth, right? Authentic.
This is also something that they stole from black people. This is actually AAVE from Lil B the Bass God. That is who came up with the term based, by the way.
And in a system that is perceived to be saturated with performative virtue, cruelty can often be read as sincerity. You're not trying to show anyone that you're a good person. The opposite. This is how you get to a point where you have this guy on a microphone celebrating the death of Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent on camera for the whole world to see.
And all you liberal commie motherfuckers, keep your hands to yourself or you're gonna get hurt today, alright? We executed one of you yesterday. We executed one of you yesterday.
This to me seems like someone who is very deep into this identity group. That in their mind they've got to a point where they've stopped seeing humanity and they are purely just performing to be approved by their group. Now, whilst this happens on a social level, you see it in like the Rogan sphere comedy, the Austin comedy scene.
Jesus Christ! God.
Way to ruin
take
the whole
Take your
mood.
New York liberal fatty bullshit back with you. Banning LGBT competition. Jesus Christ. Virtue signaling on this show. How dare you, sir?
He probably did kill Tony in like 2014. What do you call a black doctor? Nothing. There are no black doctors. Ah! The kill Tony fucking mongoloids are like, yeah! Yeah! Say the N-word! You son of a bitch, that was incredible.
But eventually, right, it moves from, you know, the social level. And in the same way that virtue signaling ended up being commodified by the powerful, so too, vice signaling is landing in the hands of the powerful.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab him by the pussy.
I would bomb the out of him.
And I say, why is it we only take people from whole countries?
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
I would bring back waterboarding, and I'd bring back a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?
Obviously, a large part of Trump's appeal was vice signaling. These original controversies, whilst assumed they would kill Trump's career, did the opposite. It bolstered support for Trump because it made him seem real for rejecting the morality of the liberal elite. But as time goes past and Trump takes more and more political power, the same performative nature happens, and it results in official American government social media accounts just posting basically neo-Nazi shit, ASMR deportation videos. It resulted in Trump cutting US aid, literally money that was helping the most vulnerable people on earth. It resulted in Elon Musk coming in and cutting things like pediatric care, cancer research for children. Despite Elon Musk's Doge saving basically no money and only making normal people's lives worse, part of it was just to signal that they rejected all of the woke things that progressives cared about.
Renee Nicole Good died being a nigger lover. She died because she wanted to protect who would not piss on her if she was on fire. Anybody saying that she didn't try to run him over, you're a lover. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to end it there. Shout out to Johnny the Giant. I highly suggest you guys watch that video. You know, for the rest, there's about 15 more minutes of that video, so definitely watch the rest of it. I loved it when I watched it. That's why I wanted to react to it. I feel like this is an important topic, you know, because I do feel like it's always important to examine how we got to a certain place, right? And I do think, you know, that is a great synopsis to show how we arrived here at this point. You know, we got here because fake performative virtue signaling to try to appear like you were a good person without putting in any actual work and shunning those who didn't say the right things basically led us to the point where there was such a backlash to where open racism, open sexism is borderline acceptable again in society because of, again, people like Nick Fuentes and people like Tucker Carlson. And, you know, he doesn't talk as nasty, but, you know, he says the same types of inflammatory things. You know, so as long as nobody's doing anything that's actually materially going to benefit people, you're going to keep seeing this pendulum swing because, again, as he said, psychological studies have shown that people are way more willing to cling on to their group when things are bad, and things have been bad for a long time. So hopefully y'all learned something, man, because I learned a lot watching that video. A lot of those things, you know, were just sort of intuitive, I guess, but, you know, it was really nice to, you know, have somebody put it into words. And I recommend another one of his videos as well. It's called How He Escaped the Alt-Right Pipeline. Yeah, check out his channel. But this has been Shane G. This is Politics as Usual right here on the Ethos Media Network. Please make sure you like, share, and you subscribe. Till next time. Peace.